brothers. Betsy, welcome back to the show. Please tell me a little bit how you got involved with Green Book.
I wanted the job. I read a log line, like 2 lines in the paper about this movie that was going to be made. I didn't know anybody. And I do have an agent, and I called her and I said, I desperately need to have an interview for this movie. She said, I beg your pardon. I said, I don't know. This movie is leaping, off the page at me, and I'm begging you. So I don't know how she did it, bless her. I think her assistant got in touch with Pete Fair, or the producer's assistant, and they kind of made like assistant friends, and my resume got in the pile, and Pete Fairley responded to it. Oh. And he offered me the job. I was like, hooray!
That's terrific. And then what are the next steps? Do you then start looking at 60s styling? Do you get the mood boards together? How does it work from there?
Well, in this particular case, the next step was the producer came walking in and he goes, I'm just going to tell you something. You have X amount of dollars all in. That includes everyone's salary, everyone's pension, everyone's children, and the costumes, and your staff. And you've got to, if you agree to this amount of money, you've got the job. Otherwise, you don't have the job. Oh. So that's how that one started. And so you kind of have to think about how do I put the money on the screen? See, this is something that as a costume designer, I'm very aware of, Let's get the money on the screen, and where we don't need to spend a lot of money, let's still make it look good, but let's not break the bank here. So I said yes. So the lucky thing about Green Book in terms of reference is that Nick Vallelonga, who is the son of Tony Vallelonga, wrote the original draft of the script, and Pete Fairley then worked on it and did revisions with him. But Nick Vallelonga had photos of his father at the Copacabana, in his maitre d' outfit, and there were the dancers. There he was with, like Tom Jones. Pictures. And then he had pictures of his mother, and he had, and so I was able to, and he had those letters in the movie that Viggo Mortensen's writing home. He had the letters.
Wow.
And so I drew on that to begin with, as well as research from that period. And I actually was interesting. There wasn't as much information about Don Shirley. Mostly what I could, which was Mahershala Ali's character, most of what I could find was a few album covers of his. Right. So that gave me a little bit of flavor, and one picture of him in his Carnegie Hall apartment, which gave me some flavor. And then I did a lot of research of his contemporaries, who he might have brushed up against in the jazz world. And, like Miles Davis, those guys were very stylish. They had, I call it Italian preppy, although it has nothing to do with Italian. Well, Italians dress that way too. That it's somebody who's like enamored with that preppy look, but they've got a little more sense of style, a little more sense of color. And so those were some of my references for Mahershala. Right. So it's never for me like, oh, let's get the Sears catalog, it's more about the world that the movie's existing in.
Interesting. And I noticed when in the film it must have been quite a choice to have him look like a musician, because you have a lot of suits that Mahershala Ali wears, but to kind of give it that flair and that flamboyance that he's not a businessman in a suit, he's a musician wearing these suits. How did you manage to cross that bridge?
Well, it was very important for his character that he wanted people to know he was educated, he was smart, he was also a learned man, and he wanted to be treated as such. And so that's, but then, like you say, he had to have the flair. But by using sort of unique colors, like his opening suit that he gets to go on the road is similar to the color of this top I'm wearing. It's like, I have the money to buy a muted, green suit. I have the money to wear this beautiful gray and mustard plaid sport coat and pair it with, I have the color sense and the education. I've been around the world. I know that you could wear a mustard.
Yeah, that was awesome, that bit.
With that.
Yeah, that's...
I know, so it was all very sophisticated color palette and choices for him.
Yeah.
And that's how
that mustard thing. Oh my God, that was like, I think my overriding costume memory. I mean, the film's costumes are staggering. Betsy, you should have got your Oscar here. This was Oscar-winning costume design without a doubt, and it should have happened. But we move over that. But mustard was my thing. I just all I could say in my head afterwards is just, oh my God, you just used that in the most beautiful way. I mean, there's one particular outfit, isn't it? I think it's one you've been talking about, but it just looks astonishing. It's him. And when you sit him next to Tony Lip and his clothes, which I'm guessing were to sort of accentuate the extra weight that Viggo put on, it's kind of like his belly's out and he's got the untucked shirts it's so characterful. I just think it's such brilliant costume design because it's just so, these people, you see them on screen for minutes, and I've read them. And I just think that's one of my favorite things about the costumes in this is they are just so specific to character. I love it.
Thank you so much. That's very nice.
It's so
it's beautiful, but it makes sense. It's not just costume for costume's sake. This is the character. These are the characters, and it totally works for him. And it frustrated me a little bit that coverage sort of focused on just how gorgeous he looked in it, as Don Shirley. But it's more than that. It really defines his character, and I think that's so important. And that wasn't perhaps zeroed in on enough. I don't think it's amazing costume design. It really, Betsy, it's just.
Well done, Betsy. I cut you off earlier. Sorry.
The interesting thing about that portion of the program was that I wanted to the mustard, and it was beautiful with his skin tone, and there he was in a very sophisticated color palette. But then there was Viggo, very unsophisticated, kind of, and that 3-button cashmere polo belonged to his grandfather that he was wearing.
Really?
But it wasn't mustard, but it was in the palette world. And then I knew we were going to cut to the wife, and I had her in one of those padded robes that were so prevalent. I mean, that's like a late 50s. I went back a little bit into the 50s for that family, whereas Mahershala was bang on 1962. He was right on it.
Yeah, I love what Betsy was saying there about this idea that costumes aren't, depending on who you're framing on screen, aren't necessarily going to be 100% from that moment. A lot of people, especially older people, are going to have older suits, older PJs, older dress. They're going to have clothes that they've had for years. Clothes years ago were generally built to last a lot more now. It's a lot more throwaway with clothing. But like Betsy was saying, they're in the Bronx, they got a lot of money. That probably would be a slightly dated outfit. Compared to Don's obviously bang on 1962 ensemble.
Betsy, I was going to ask you about the weight that Viggo Mortensen was putting on. Did you find that troublesome at all, tailoring him whilst he's kind of fluctuating between weight?
He was on my bucket list, and I was in shock that something on my bucket list was actually going to happen, But I got his measurements, and he gave me his real measurements. And then Nick Vallelonga's uncle sent me a picture showing, look, here I am with my brother and Viggo in front of our restaurant in upstate New York. And Viggo was as big as a house in the picture. And if he had not sent me that picture, I would have been, what, as we say. And I was like, oh my God, this guy is not a 32, 31 waist. This guy is a 38 waist. And so I quickly luckily this was before my main fitting, was preliminary fitting. And so But I got, I always like to get some samples in before you make stuff. I want to try some stuff on, and I running through the aisles in, Western costume, trying to find some 38-inch waist pants for a sample, like going like crazy. And so I was saved by this photograph. I mean, honestly, I was like, who's that guy? It's like I waited my whole life and this is who he is.
Interesting.
Oh, great. I gotta tell you, he comes in the room, just a little reminiscent, comes in the room. He brought some things from home because it was a small budget film. He didn't know anything about me or who was going to be doing his costume. So he just very politely brought some ideas in with him.
Nice.
And then he did at the end comment, "Thank God it's you." I was like, I was like,
oh, that's really sweet.
But he is such a professional. I would put, even the first fitting, I said, okay, let's just the sample. Let's try these pants. Let's try this shirt. Because I used a lot of real vintage tops on him, because you can't, it's really hard. And I used all my money on Mahershala. I mean, honestly, I knit all those sweaters that he wore. I had those knitted.
Oh, they are beautiful, by the way.
I'm big on knitwear and I'm big on coats, but in my career. But anyway, and the minute I would put the camera up, he became Tony Lip. And the poses, the wardrobe stills are gorgeous. And he's staring down that camera like Tony Lip. And the two of them, what an opportunity for me.
Yeah.
I didn't know how I knew this ahead of time. It was the opportunity of a lifetime to have the pleasure of working with those two actors. Well, and Linda Cardellini, she was wonderful too. I don't mean to put her as an aside, but we're talking about the men in this interview. So that's what I'm focusing on.
Yeah, she was terrific also. And I remember when I was watching it and I was thinking, Viggo Mortensen, he's really put on the chicken here, because, I'd reference him with History of Violence, Eastern Promises. So I imagine when I picture Viggo Mortensen, he's still the tough guy in this film. He's still beating people up. But in his previous films, he's doing it with a very svelte figure. He looks pretty good doing it. Here, he's just a bit of a tubster doing it, more martial art. Yeah.
And I remember saying to him, okay, Viggo, he would tease me. He would torture me. He'd stop by the trailer and he'd say, hi. I'd say, hey. He'd say, guess what I'm having for lunch today? I'd say, what? He'd say, pizza. And I was,
and he just folds it up and
afterwards.
So cute. Yeah, but apparently Nick Vallelonga told us his dad would eat the pizza that way. He'd take the whole pizza. And honestly, credit to the craft. This was a man who liked to eat in real life, Tony Lip. So why wouldn't he be heavy? Why would he be the skinny guy? Viggo was right.
I like the way he was always hoiking his trousers up as well.
Well, he did that for me. He did that for me because I said to him, Viggo, your pants are coming down and they're supposed to be up on your waist and they're falling down because of your tummy. And he just would go like this. And then in the movie, he'd do it. He'd pull them up.
Yeah.
I knew he was doing it for me. I mean, he wasn't really, but that's how I felt.
Yeah.
That's kind of a belly thing, isn't it? If you're a guy with belly, it's either like you put it underneath or it goes over high up over the top.
Yeah, there's no win-win in this situation, really. I was going to ask Betsy also about some of the big scenes where there's lots of extras, like the dining scenes, especially I think it's the last performance that he has to do and he refuses to do it because he can't eat there. Everyone is dressed to the nines. It looks like a white tie do. That must have been quite production to make sure that all of these are kitted out.
So great. This was the challenge of this film. The repurposed challenge. Now, for a scene like that, there's no repurposing. I mean, in other words, like when I'm dressing a big street in Brooklyn or in the Bronx, in this particular case, I've got to reuse those clothes in another scene in another way. So it's like, okay, if I put a different blouse with this skirt, or in the men's case, if I change if it's an exterior and he has the hat and the overcoat, then it's New York. Because we never left New Orleans. We were in Louisiana for that whole movie. So if he takes off the coat, changes his top, he can be in the Bronx, and the same for the women. So, but those fancy scenes, the Copacabana and the big performance scenes had to all be repurposed for those 2 scenes because of a financial situation that I was in. So this is what I did. I counted. I said, okay, for this scene, the men always wore dark suits in the evening. Okay, so there's going to be, 60 men, so I need about 80 dark suits. Okay, now in New Orleans, they're a bit heavier than they are in LA, so I'm going to get a little bit bigger. So, I mean, we did it all on paper, like a chart, how many we would need, and for the women too, And, can this dress be somebody's going out for dinner in a hotel in Alabama? Yeah, and I can use that later. So we're like counting.
Wow.
I know it's not glamorous, but that's what we did. And every single piece was a vintage original for the background. Every single piece.
Wow. Well, it looks spectacular. And I think what the biggest achievement, or one of the big achievements, was how you made it. You had a modest budget from what you're telling me, but you made it look very expensive and very rich. And certainly with some of the knits that I want to say his name right.
You got to put the money. Yeah. You've got to, like I say, where is it going to show? You got to put the money where it's going to show. And him in that argyle, that was a very jazz kind of sweater. Jazz musician kind of sweater. You're not going to find that. And I thought I wanted an argyle, but a taste not like an argyle. And I wanted the little lady in my neighborhood. She knits them for me, whatever I.
Wow, she made those? That's incredible.